Lightbearer, The Crimson Chronicle, Part 1. Written by J.A. Hawk. Read for you by Joshua Garner. Chapter 13. The Waters of Eulfron. The soft light radiating within the mountain was insufficient after the bright sunlight of the mountainside, and everything was cloaked in a dark shroud. From within the darkness, the sounds of dripping water, running water, pooling water, and cascading water replaced what they could not see. Slowly, when their eyes adjusted to the dimness, the waters of Eulfron started to reveal themselves. The waters of Eulfron and the cavern which was their home was vast in the extreme. A geological marvel stretching far into the distance and eventually out of sight as the caves twisted into the depths. Shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom of the caverns like white-hot daggers flooding in from long tunnels cut into the ceiling of the rock. Just as the light rays assaulted the darkness with impunity, they were also slaves to the machinations of large mirrors made of polished silver that were mounted upon the roof of the caverns. The sunlight that came through the tunnels spilled its brilliance into the caves, where it would be captured by the mirrors, then forcefully redirected and pointed into a desired direction. Most all of the proud rays from above ultimately resolved themselves into the depths of any one of the numerous pools of swirling water that littered the floor. Great basins, cut from natural stone and crafted in varying sizes, held the pools of water. When the light was directed into these pools, it sent thousands upon thousands of blue and white mottled bands of light shimmering in every direction. The rays danced freely in the dimness, reflecting off the walls and floors of polished stone. This effect gave the caverns a mystical aura and an air of secrets long forgotten. From some of the larger stone basins flowed many rivulets of water. These small rivers ran down crafted and cut paths into smaller pools of vibrant blue or enchanting green. Some, unexplainably, contained both. Some rivulets cast themselves over brilliant waterfalls or similar obstacles of cascading magnificence into wide, shallow runs that looked to be made of natural crystal. Freed from constraint, the water danced with the light which shone through these crystalline structures. The multifaceted surfaces multiplied their brilliance tenfold. Then the twisting paths would move the water on again to hidden places unknown. Everyone stood in silence, marveling at the wonders before them, content to listen to the soft melody sung by the innumerable voices of Eulfron. The prince was the first to break the silence. "This is..." Felix's voice faltered, and he tried again. "It's just..." But words seemed to utterly fail him, and he relapsed back into silence, mouthing helplessly. "We know what you mean," Fate said in a pleased voice. "You know, it is much more impressive from this angle," she reflected. Felix looked curiously up at her. Fate shifted slightly atop Edek's back. "When our master brought us for our trial, it was only to the novice shrine," she explained. "A dinky little statue of the goddess, with a pool of water about her feet," Fletch explained. Then in a gruff, mocking voice he added, "The underfoot entrance." Fate laughed, a tinkling sound that echoed and reflected off the surfaces of the water and stone about them. She clutched at her side with a pained wince, but a small smile lingered upon her face. "Oh, it was pretty in its own way," Fate said in response to the look of confusion on the prince's face. "You see, Fletch wasn't convinced we had hiked all the way up this mountain to look for a small shrine. He and I decided to do some exploring after Master Silver went to sleep. And, well, as you can see, his instincts were quite right." Fletch shook his head with an air of mock annoyance. "Silver never was a good liar." "But I don't understand. Why would he want to keep something like this from you?" Felix asked. "It's beautiful." "Well, I don't think he did," Fate said thoughtfully. Not really. Master Silver had a cunning mind and a bit of a flair for independent thinking. Fletch scratched the fur under his neck idly. When we got back from our nighttime adventure, he was awake and very much alert. I'd figured he would birch us for sneaking off, but all he said was, "The underfoot entrance not good enough for you?" When we failed to answer, he said, "Good," and left it at that. I've often wondered if he didn't expect us to find the true waters for ourselves, Fate mused. That's the kind of thing he would do. He would try to teach us to pierce the facade and see beyond just what our eyes tell us. Fate gave a small yelp. Whoa! Edek had lurched forward unexpectedly. The sudden movement nearly unseated Fate, and she scrabbled desperately for the cinch cord in front of her. The drake made his way quickly towards a small rivulet of water that was twisting and turning nearby. Fate seemed to plummet from the air as Edek flopped down onto his haunches roughly. The drake stuck his froth-riddled muzzle deep into the trickling stream and began to drink heartily. Could give a girl a warning, Fate said grumpily, righting herself. She looked towards the other two. Help me down, would you? I want to be on something that's not moving for a while. Fletch and Felix hurried over to Fate, and with their help she slowly lowered herself onto the polished stone floor. Ow, she bemoaned. I think I've lost all the fur between my legs. Fate stood slightly bow-legged, then punched the drake on the side. You're too hard. A few amused bubbles escaped from Edek, who did not lift his snout from the stream. You've told me this place is special, Prince Felix said. He resisted the temptation to look and see if Fate really was missing any fur. Beautiful, a spectacle to be sure. I can't argue with that. But what now? You suppose we can actually do something about this? The prince wiggled his ashen fingers through the air. Yes, I do, Fate said kindly. But first I think we must... Fate stopped her sentence dead. Her ears twitched, and she whirled her head around, staring into the depths of the caverns. I heard it too, Fletch said quickly, his paw jumping to Swan. He drew the blade slowly from its scabbard. Everyone peered intently into the mottled darkness of the cavern. They seemed to be alive, moving softly in the strange reflections from the waters. Darkness chased away, only to be replaced again by the gloom. A sound came from within the darkness, a soft, clicking noise. It sounded like 4 sets of claws tapping upon the stone, much the same noise as when Edek walked. The sound became louder. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be stalking ever closer. Then, from within the darkness, 2 luminescent pinpricks shone out brilliantly, reflecting what little light glimmered from the ever-moving waters. The reflections peered at the group with an intense curiosity for a long moment. Then they blinked away. Fletch stepped forward slowly, edging his way around Fate. The prince mirrored the movement from the other side. Fate drew upon the light, gathering it about her. In this place, the sensation felt like a cool breeze across the back of her neck. Edek had lifted his head from the tiny stream. The drip, drip from the water about his snout sounded uncannily loud as it streamed onto the floor. The drake was very still, watching the shadows and sniffing the air vigorously. Hail! Fletch's voice rang out strong and clear above the sound of the waters. What lingers in the shadows beyond sight? The creature came closer still. The first they saw of it properly was a blurred shape from behind a curtain of cascading water. It walked slowly, determinedly, and seemingly unafraid. It rounded the curtain of water and stepped full into the light of one of the rays casted from the ceiling above. What they had taken to be a much larger creature turned out to be a being of slender build. It was tall by normal standards and looked to be feminine, with sleek-toned muscles. She stood erect on 2 long legs, and they could see a long, slender tail that drooped to the floor. Her skin had scales much like Edek, but, unlike Edek, they were of a dazzling white-blue color. Her head had a short muzzled face, resting upon an elegant slender neck. The scales about her face seemed softer, giving her a gentle look, if not for the eyes. They were unsettling to look at for overlong. They seemed to pierce through whatever they landed upon. A focused gaze, with the unmistakable intensity and ferocity born of a predator. The color of her eyes was impossible to ascertain, as they seemed to shift hues, like the waters of the sea as it passes amongst the shoals. Extending out from her head were two short horns on either side that arched in a gentle curve. Adorned to each of these horns was a set of golden ringlets that swayed softly as she moved. A long mane of silvered hair cascaded around her head and horns, stretched down her back and came to rest in gentle layers just above her tail. She wore a covering of what looked to be silk, sky blue and artfully styled to her unique proportions. Sewn about the garment were more of the small golden ringlets. They were fashioned in a way that mimicked the shape of her scales, and they tinkled and clicked musically whenever they alighted upon the harder scales of her skin. "Have you a voice, guardian of the water?" Fletch said stiffly. "Guardian?" The creature spoke. Her voice was measured and calm. "I had no idea such a fierce reputation had sprung up around my home. It's rather ominous. Is this what Lightbearers teach now?" "You know what we are?" Fletch called out uncertainly, but his sword was unwavering, directed at the creature. "Of course. The light shines brightly within all of you," the creature said. Her gaze moved to each of them in turn. "It has been many cycles of the moon since the last visit from your order, but I did not think it so long as to cloud my existence entirely. Light-bearers, traveling with a Scaleblood." Her wandering gaze rested upon Edek. "Well met, Broodkin." Despite the possible danger, every eye went to Edek. The drake had not moved. He did not seem to be overly tense or alarmed by the appearance of this guardian. He merely gazed back at the creature with a calm, somewhat wary eye. "Wait, Edek, do you know them?" Fate asked quickly, her eyes darting from Edek to the slender creature, looking for a sign of recognition. "I knew of them," Edek said calmly. "We have never met." "It's true. I rarely reveal myself to anyone. Some find my presence unsettling," the creature replied. "But please know that I bear you no ill will." She smiled, revealing a flicker of sharp teeth. Fletch shared a quick glance with Edek, who tilted his head slightly in reply. The fox relaxed his posture. "I see," he said slowly, sheathing his curved blade. "Forgive us. Our time on the mountain has been met with blood and pain. The wounds of the world never seem to fully close." The creature's voice was sad. "You may find safe haven here for a little while, if that is what you seek." Her eyes suddenly flared, a blue fire fierce as a raging storm. "But assumptions are dangerous, so tell me, why have you come here? You look rather young to be masters leading a new acolyte." Fate let the light she had been gathering dissipate as she stopped drawing upon it. "Thank you for your offer of shelter, mistress." Fate's small voice faltered off. "Soraya," the creature said kindly. She took a few steps closer. "You may call me by that name." "Soraya," Fate repeated. She took a hobbling step forward in turn. "We need help." Fate glanced quickly back at Felix. "Our friend is hurt, or cursed, I don't know exactly, but he needs healing quickly. I think his time runs short. The waters of Eulfron have been said to have the most lucrative potential for water technique anywhere in Landor. Her voice became an honest plea. Will you allow us to pass? To at least try and heal our friend? Soraya moved closer until she was looking down at Fate. Even with her long years, Fate was much shorter than she. You can barely stand yourself, and you ask succor on behalf of another, Soraya said quietly. You've a good heart, young one. Soraya's gaze moved to Prince Felix. The prince did not shy away from the piercing blue eyes, but he was visibly uncomfortable under their scrutiny, and he shifted nervously from one foot to the other. Your fears are justified, Soraya said seriously, looking back at Fate. His light feels like a shuttered lantern. If you will follow me, perhaps we can mend the fracture that seems to scatter his light so. Slowly she turned on her heel and proceeded deeper into the depths of the cavern. Fate looked back at her companions. Prince Felix's face was set in a tight frown, but he bravely followed after the retreating Soraya. Edek, with much jostling of gear, got to his large feet and slowly trundled after the prince. Lastly, Fletch came to stand next to Fate. Fletch? Fate said desperately. Do you think she can really help him? I don't know, he said, wrapping Fate's paw around his neck. But our ward is escaping nonetheless. With Fletch helping to support Fate's weight, they followed quickly after the rest. Soraya led them deep along twisting paths into the very heart of the waters of Eulfron. Many a head turned to examine the unique decor as they passed. Innumerable beautiful formations, all cleverly fashioned from stone or crystal, all with a focused design to pass the running waters from one holding chamber to another in displays of simplistic beauty. They followed Soraya's long strides and beset silence. The demeanor of the group had become serious. The only sound apart from the water song was the occasional click of claws upon the hard stone floor. Eventually, Soraya slowed to a stop at the edge of a great shallow basin. The large pool was big enough to step into. It was cut from a pale stone, and the bottom was fashioned from crystal, pure white of color and sparkling. A singular ray of light from above, unbroken by any of the polished mirrors, shone unmolested directly into the basin and lit upon the multitude of facets of the crystalline bottom. Around the empty basin stood many a secondary chalice, filled to the brim with waters that awaited patiently, unnaturally still, with a mirror-quality sheen. This is the heart of Eulfron, Soraya said in a calm voice. A place where serenity is at its purest. She slowly turned to face them, then looked upon Felix. Show me the extent of your curse. What shelters your light so much? Prince Felix looked around nervously at the rest of them, but worried looks were the only reply. With his face set, he unbuckled the arming sword from around his waist. Then he hunched over, and with a pull and a tug, his shirt and cloak came free. He let his clothing slump to the floor in a heap, along with his sword. The prince straightened his back, looking as proudly as he could manage under the gaze of Soraya and the others. Fate let out a small gasp of pity. The ashen fur which had started at Felix's paw had risen and spread. It now encompassed the entirety of his arm and reached well across his chest. A few creeping tendrils of ash, even now, clawed greedily around his neck like a noose. Well? Felix asked sadly. Is there any hope for me? He looked up timidly at Soraya. Soraya did not speak. Her luminous eyes moved slowly across the form of the young rabbit, taking in his various features. They moved across his face, then down his body, and finally they seemed to alight upon his paw, where they stayed transfixed for a long time. The paw that carried the crimson catalyst. that was fused upon the prince's finger. Soraya closed her eyes as she drew upon the light, gathering it about her. The basin at her feet began to fill, the many chalices divulging their contents into the larger bowl. The water was unnaturally still as it moved down in rigid pillars. It did not seem to flow, but it filled the basin all the same until it was full, casting a mirror sheen across its surface. "If you've the courage to endure, submerge yourself in the water," Soraya said. Prince Felix stiffened for a moment. Then slowly he stepped forward to the edge of the basin. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the silvery pool. Barely a ripple was cast as he made his way into the center of the basin. With the water all around his waist, he slowly submerged himself fully, laying upon his back, floating face upturned in the mirrored liquid. Fate, Fletch, and Edek watched with eyes transfixed as Soraya formed the light around the water gathered in the basin. The waters started to move slowly around the body of the prince, outlining and following the curves of his form. The prince's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but slowly became drowsy and then lazily closed. Soraya started chanting softly, or perhaps it was a song. The words were vaguely recognized as those of the keeper's tongue, but the dialect was old, older than anything Fate had ever heard, and their meaning remained a mystery. The waters were swirling in earnest now, becoming a tormented whirlpool of shining light and fevered motion. In contrast, the prince's body remained deathly still, unmoved by the currents raging around him. At first, nothing seemed to be happening. But then slowly, an ink-like substance seemed to seep from the prince's body into the crystalline water. It gathered and pooled like a black oil, averse to the water's currents. It lingered on top of them like a vile film. As the corruption gathered, the ashen fur upon Felix began to recede, as if flowing out into the swirling tempest. So too did the dye they had used to darken his fur. Slowly, ever so slowly, the prince reverted to his hereditary shade of cinnamon-colored fur, shared by those of the royal family. Soraya's song reached a crescendo, and without warning the flows of water forced the prince's face beneath the surface. In his trance-like state, the prince did not react at first. Then, to Fate's horror, she saw Felix's mouth open and air bubbles release. "Something is wrong," Fate said quickly, watching the prince thrash as the currents continually assaulted him. "Stop! Stop!" she shouted. "You're gonna kill him!" Fletch's paw went to the hilt of his sword. Fate started forward quickly, determined to pull the prince from the water. Before she had taken more than a step, a quick yank upon her collar halted her in her tracks. Edek had grabbed her in his great jaws by the nape of her neck and was holding her fast. She lifted a foot into the air as the drake pulled her back from the edge of the basin. "Wait," Edek growled from between a mouthful of fur. "But," Fate argued, struggling to get free of his jaws. "Have I ever lied to you?" Edek muttered, dropping her in between his huge front paws. "Be still and wait." Fate bounced on her heels and looked desperately at Fletch. He was more tense than she had ever seen him, but he held his ground and his peace. Fate reached up and nervously took hold of one of the bony spikes of Edek's head to help steel herself and shore up trust in his words. Prince Felix gave a terrible shudder from beneath the rolling waters. His back arched in a twisting motion. From within him came a flood of the putrid, black substance. Like all the rest, it separated itself from the waters to collect with its own kind. The prince bobbed to the surface, and a gush of clear liquid escaped him. He choked and coughed, but his eyes remained tightly shut. The silvered waters twisted violently, gathering around the black substance, cornering it like a predator would prey. Then, with a swift, violent motion, the current forced the black substance down where it gathered in a thick, murky haze around the crimson catalyst. The inky substance was being forced into the faceted red jewel, which became darker and darker until it was a deep, violet purple. Soraya's enchanting song ended, and the waters of the pool slowly receded back into their chalices with the same unnatural motion as before. Edek lifted his great clawed paws away, releasing Fate. Fletch, however, was the first into the pool, grasping the prince and pulling him to the edge of the water. Fate collapsed at the edge of the basin, reaching out to help pull the limp prince to the side. At their jostling, the crimson catalyst slowly released its erstwhile manic grip from around Prince Felix's finger and fell to the bottom of the pool with a heavy clink. Fate directed the gathered light she had collected into the pool of water where she sat submerged. Her technique reflected back upon itself with relative ease, spreading a tingling sensation through her body and lingering around her bruised ribs. She couldn't help but squirm at the tickling sensation. The pool gave off a soft, pulsing glow. After Felix had been pulled from the waters of Eulfron, Soraya had graciously led them to an area overlooking the caverns, which held small quarters in which to rest if they desired. With the help of Fletch, they had deposited Felix into one of the domiciles. Then, Fate had wished for nothing more than a moment's solitude, just to process. She had found this secluded nook not far from their camp, where a beautiful pool of azure and jade-green morning glory stirred lazily. After the recent chaos of the last few days, when Fate looked into the pool, she had felt grimy, bloody, and sore. So she did what anyone would do, and got in. The day had waned, but within the confines of the cavern, it was only evident by the intensity of the rays of sunlight which cast down from above. The light had proceeded from sharp noonday pillars into soft wandering rays of lazy twilight. The sound of the wandering waters had a soporific effect upon Fate. "You have natural talent," a pleasant voice commented from the shadows. Fate jumped slightly. She had been deep within her own thoughts and rhythm of her technique. Soraya came into view, and Fate released the gathered light. "Oh, hello," Fate said, surprised, watching the tall guardian approach. "May I join you?" Soraya asked, sincerely, coming to the edge of the large pool. Fate made an uncertain noise and then said, "Of course," afraid of coming off rude to her host. She treaded water to the opposite side of the moderately sized pool. The tall guardian started to pull at hidden pins from within the depths of her garment. Fate, slightly embarrassed, quickly averted her eyes as Soraya's garments fell away, sliding to the floor in a silken heap. Taking her time, the guardian stepped lightly into the pool of water. Fate couldn't help but notice a glimmer of brilliant colors brought to life as the vibrant water danced against the guardian's pearlescent scales. Then suddenly, and much to Fate's surprise, the water of the pool became very warm in quick order. Steam issued in small, undulating swirls, clinging and misting happily across the surface of the water. "That's much nicer," Soraya said unabashedly as her body finally submerged. She quickly dipped her horned head under the surface. "Did you make that happen just now?" Fate asked when Soraya had emerged, swirling her arms indicating the pleasantly warm water. "Living atop of a mountain, where the snows come more often than not." Soraya pulled her long, scaled fingers down the length of each of her ridged horns and through her mane of silver hair. "You learn a few tricks about comfort." The astonishment on Fate's face was plain to see. "I've never even considered using a water technique like that." She let her long ears dip briefly into the warm water, mimicking Soraya. "Also, what you did for Felix was amazing. I've never seen anything like it before. You must be a master of healing." Soraya seemed pleased with the comment, but in a reserved tone she said, "I apologize. if I frightened you earlier, my dear. It's fate. Fate. How very lovely, Soraya replied. Your friend, his condition. You may think me a master, but it was something I have never seen before in all my time healing. I had to pluck it root and stem from him, and even then I feared it might be too much for his body to handle. Yeah, Fate stared sulkily into the depths of the water. I sorta lost my head there for a moment. I was just scared. It's understandable. I do not fault you for taking caution. Soraya took out a small curved stone and ran it down each of her arms, meticulously cleaning her scaled skin. Has he recovered? She asked. He was still resting when I left, Fate replied. I hope he comes round soon. You're quite lucky to have such stalwart guardians for companions. Soraya raised up slightly to look over Fate's head to where the shadowed outline of Edek could be seen. The drake had refused to let Fate wander the caverns by herself, even when she told him what she planned to do. Fate knew he still felt responsible for what happened with the wolf pack, and after a few weak arguments, she had given up to his stubborn ways. Now he laid with his back to them, a respectful distance away and just out of earshot. That one certainly is strong, devoted, Soraya observed. Handsome even, if he could manage to fall into one of these pools. Fate's mouth fell open in surprise. Edek? She stammered. Yes. No, I mean, I don't really know. She was utterly flabbergasted, hearing Edek spoke about in such a manner. Fate glanced quickly at the coiled form of the drake. He certainly was powerful, frighteningly so at times. As if by cue, his heavy tail twitched at that moment, making his glimmering bronze scales shift brightly in the dappled light. She supposed, to those of his kind, maybe he would be impressive, but her head just could not wrap around such a notion. Edek, Soraya muttered in a soft voice. Her eyes seemed to glimmer. She looked at Fate's bewildered face and smiled mischievously. Ah, but you prefer the cavalier one, don't you? Fate went red to her core. She could feel the heat rising in her face and tracing quickly up her ears. Fate waffled, but she quickly bit her lip to keep herself from saying anything stupid. Despite her physical attempt to stay silent, she found herself inadvertently probing her feelings about Fletch. Those feelings scared her slightly. What if he didn't care the way she cared? Fate retreated from that line of thinking and pushed those thoughts deep down within herself, closing them off. She swallowed hard. Her mouth had become painfully dry. He's a dummy, Fate said in a small voice, in as close to a carefree tone as she could manage. I'm sorry, Soraya chuckled good-naturedly. I can see I'm torturing you. Forgive me. She pushed the small stone she had used to clean her scales across the top of the water towards Fate. For the second time this evening, Fate witnessed something unexplainable. To her surprise, the little stone floated on the surface of the water, bobbing doggedly towards her. She reached out and took the stone. It was porous and slightly rough to the touch. It's not often I get to speak so candidly in light company. I've been told Scalebloods are too direct. But personally, I see no use in letting your prey slip away once you've taken the time to chase it down. Soraya closed her eyes, lazily enjoying the warm water with a contented smile upon her angular face. Fate examined the small stone in her paw. Not entirely sure what use this little rock could be to her, she compromised by idly scrubbing it across her paws. In the reflecting light of the clear water, she noticed the pink scars upon the inside of her paw pads, shimmering up at her, the badly healed wounds left by the razor's edge of the wolf's blade. She touched them carefully. One set of many scars suffered, and not all of them hers.
"What was it that you pulled from Felix?"
Fate asked, still massaging her paw tenderly. Soraya's smile hardened, and she sat up.
"I told you the truth. I really don't know. Scalebloods seek out the light for fear of what might be if our resolve should falter. But we do not know all the secrets held by the Lightkeepers, nor what may lurk in the dark places where light holds little sway."
Soraya idly poked the tip of her long tail that had floated towards the surface of the water.
"I was able to direct whatever it was into the lithium crystal of the boy's ring. I say it because I felt an intent, a resistance. We are lucky the boy's lithium crystal is so pure."
She looked directly at Fate. Her eyes shifted softly through their blue hues.
"It is the crimson catalyst, isn't it?"
Fate hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly.
"And the boy, he is the lost one?" "Felix Hemmings of Landor,"
Fate confirmed.
"So young,"
Soraya sighed.
"I fear a tough road may lay ahead for him. And you? Will you continue to guide him?" "We're trying our best. Honestly, we didn't even know if we could get him here before the curse took him. And now, I'm not really sure what we should do. Or what he wants to do. If I'm honest with myself, Fletch and I have somewhat forced his path,"
Fate confessed.
"You've put blind faith in me once already."
Soraya looked at Fate with her penetrating stare.
"If you would do so again, I would say take him to the Lightkeeper at Althurn." "Heldor,"
Fate said.
"As you well know, it is not far from here. The Landoran Prince should, at the very least, take the Crimson Catalyst to one of the Lightkeepers. They are wise beyond measure, and should be able to ascertain what devilry inflicted your friend and the great jewel. With the Crimson Catalyst found and their guidance, perhaps they can begin to correct the witless wanderings that has beset our land."
Soraya stood and removed herself from the pool. Taking her silken garments from the ground, she began to wrap them carefully around herself.
"With any luck, the Lightkeepers and your friend's heritage will be able to quell the sparks that fall so close to the tinder pile."
Again, Fate watched the Guardian from the corner of her eye until she felt decency allowed her to look at her properly.
"She certainly is comfortable in her own skin,"
Fate thought, although she couldn't help but be somewhat impressed by Soraya's brazenness. She was straightforward and confident, if nothing else. Secretly, Fate wished she had a little more of that moxie at times. The will to not overthink and just act. Fate watched Soraya carefully arranging her silks so that the little golden charms hung freely, and suddenly a sadness came over her. How long had this guardian been up here, among the snow and windswept peaks, alone? Then a notion came to Fate, and emboldened by the moment, she acted upon it without consideration.
"Would you join us tonight? For a meal?"
Fate blurted out. Soraya looked down at Fate, who shrank a little into the warm water.
"I think that can be managed,"
Soraya said, her gaze flicked in Edek's direction.
"Yes, that would be nice."
She bowed her head slightly, her wet locks falling forward. Then she turned and strode away gently. Fate watched her go until she was swallowed by the shimmering darkness. Then she stood quickly from the pool and gave a shake to rid herself of excess water. Grabbing up her shirt, she dabbed the inside of her long ears, drying them, then pulled the slightly damp cloth over her head. It hung well past her thighs without the drawstrings pulled. She stooped, bundling the rest of her clothing into a messy heap, and wrapped her arms haphazardly around the misshapen ball. She was eager to check back in on her friends and tell them of Soraya. Fate padded quickly towards the patiently awaiting sentinel that was Edek. With thoughts about the conversation fresh in her mind, and fumbling with her balled-up garments, determined attempts to escape her wet grasp, Fate failed to notice that her badly bruised ribs no longer seem to hurt her. Thank you for listening to this audio recording of Lightbearer by J.A. Hawk. If you enjoyed this production, consider supporting the author's work. Your support goes a long way in helping independent artists with projects like this one. Paperback copies of Lightbearer are now available for purchase through Amazon.com. And for readers who prefer a hardback version, they may be purchased through BarnesandNoble.com. Follow the links below or scan the QR code to pick up your copy of Lightbearer today.